The morning heat rose off the carrier deck in waves, blurring the space between aircraft and air handlers, between clipped orders and unreadable looks. Below the angled bow, water churned blue and white, but up here everything shimmered with oil and friction. An FA-18. Super Hornet hissed as its lines disconnected, its nose tilted just slightly under the weight of readiness. Tech crews moved fast and silent, eyes shielded behind mirrored lenses, heads turned always toward the next checklist. Above them, deck officers called commands that cut straight through the roar of turbines. Nothing slowed unless ordered. No one paused unless told. Reese moved through it like part of the steel itself. Her boots found each line between panels. Her helmet bag rested against her hip, straps tucked and smoothed. Her gloves were looped neatly through her belt. She passed by two fully loaded jets without looking at them. Pilots stood beside them, laughing about something on one of their phones. A third man glanced at her, then leaned to whisper into the next one's ear. The laughter didn't grow louder, but it shifted direction. By the catwalk edge, a folding table had been set up beneath a roll-down canopy, where a group of officers stood around a digital briefing screen. One tapped at a tablet, dragging icons across a map marked with intercept zones and carrier strike formations. The list of pilot assignments updated as they watched, each slot sliding cleanly into the next. Reese stopped a few feet short of the group. No one noticed. The screen glowed pale blue. The last name appeared. It wasn't hers. No one said her name at all. From behind the group, a tall figure with a buzzed fade and freshly issued flight vest took a step back to snap a photo. He turned the screen just enough to catch the names, made sure the glint of the carrier tower framed the edge, and hit send. The caption showed up seconds later on the group chat that pinged across most of the younger squadron's private feed. The image of the pilot roster had a single message written across it. "She's clocked more time in menus than in the sky." No one laughed out loud. But one of the younger pilots cracked a smile, the corner of his mouth tightening just enough. Another tapped his comms earpiece and adjusted it like he hadn't heard. Reese didn't move. The digital briefing continued. The officers began discussing fuel offsets. Someone else stepped in behind her and brushed past without a word. When the names were finalized, a petty officer handed out printed flight cards. They were crisp, warm from the tray printer. Reese didn't receive one. She watched as the stack passed from hand to hand, each with a call sign written in red ink across the top corner. No ink touched her name that day. There was no line to skip, no duty to reject, just a quiet absence. She turned from the table and headed across the midship path toward the lower stairwell. The sun caught the back of her neck and reflected off the insignia she no longer wore. Behind her, the buzz of assignment planning thinned, replaced by the whine of launch prep and final hand signals. She reached the side entrance to the lower deck, typed in the access code with a worn, gloved finger, and descended alone into the metal spine of the ship. The Simbay air felt cooler, drier. The lights buzzed faintly overhead. Only 2 chairs were occupied. Reese crossed to the folding table at the edge of the pod row and set down her helmet bag. A sticky note had been pressed to the canvas strap. The handwriting was blocky, dark. It said, simply, "Sim only pilot." She peeled it off, folded it once, and slipped it into the outer pocket. Then she sat, adjusted the headset, and logged into the validation terminal. Her job was simple: track and confirm visual and radar hits during live intercept simulations, match angles, cross-check velocity decay, report nothing unless something failed. She had the headset for listening, not speaking. At the far end of the bay, a group of off-duty pilots gathered briefly around a tablet. One of them held a cup of iced coffee against his arm as he scrolled. Reese caught a flash of the group photo they'd just taken. She was in the background, out of focus, walking behind a group of Rafale crew members. The caption on the post read, "Top deck, real jets only." She didn't look again. Instead, she leaned forward and ran the pre-check diagnostic on the sim feed routing. Everything was green. Nothing needed adjusting. The sensor calibration aligned with the visual frames at 100.0%. Her cursor hovered over the live feed link, then selected it. The radar paths lit up. Faint arcs, coastline bands, carrier signal distortion, all exactly where they were meant to be. She adjusted the headset over her ears and waited. The chair she sat in was standard issue, metal-backed, the kind meant to fold into a wall when not in use. It didn't have padding. Her knees bent precisely 90 degrees. She placed her gloves beside her on the console. Table. Fingers down. Palms folded. No one spoke to her. No one asked her opinion. Someone walked past and set an energy drink down next to the monitor. It wasn't hers. They didn't apologize. The can hissed gently from condensation. She moved it to the side with one knuckle and returned to the screen. Outside, another Super Hornet roared skyward. Her name was never on the call-out. She logged the sortie with the same care she always used, eyes moving between the timing overlay and the radar reflection data. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She was there to record, not to act. Above her, the jets cut tight turns against the sun. Their vapor trails curved sharp and white against the open sky. Down here, Reese sat beneath flickering light, headset on, watching every move from a deck they would never let her walk again. Not unless something failed. Not unless someone broke. Not unless all the other names ran out. The Simbay after midnight was a world of quiet hums and flickering light, a hollowed-out corner of the ship that didn't belong to anyone except those with nowhere else to be. Most of the consoles were off, their screens dark, but a few diagnostic lights pulsed amber from the wall panels. One workstation near the center glowed soft green, casting a dim halo across the surface of a weathered desk. Reese sat at that station alone. Her headset adjusted precisely, its cable looped behind her collar and tucked to avoid interference. The jack was loose, as always. She'd learned to tilt it slightly left until the audio channel stayed stable. It wasn't regulation equipment. It was just old, like everything else in this room. And like everything else in this room, it still worked if you respected it. Her gloves rested neatly beside the console. Next to them, a thick paper logbook lay open. The pages were filled with hand-drawn radar arcs, faint pencil timing marks, vector curves, and coded notations scrawled in a style that hadn't changed since her earliest years in flight school. The corners of the pages were worn soft, each one folded with purpose. There were no tabs, no flags, no bookmarks. She remembered where everything was. The SIM interface crackled once as the old radar module came online. Reese leaned forward, adjusted the range manually, and entered a set of coordinates for a low-C intercept trial. No one had asked her to run it. The scenario wasn't listed on any training docket. It existed only in her notes and in the long shadow of a maneuver that had never been cleared for flight. She had started developing it 4 years ago, based on a mismatch between logged return signals and actual threat response during coastal drills. It was a theory built on a contradiction. If radar signals could be disrupted by the surface layer of warm ocean water, then, under the right conditions, they might also reflect back not up, but out, flat across the surface. The result, in theory, was a mirrored lock-on angle, a way to see what no one else could track, but only if you adjusted the beam manually, and only if you knew what to look for. Her submission to the board had been dismissed. The feedback called it sim-only logic. One instructor said it read like a thesis from someone who liked paper more than planes. Another added, it would never hold outside a scenario. But she had seen it, and she knew it worked. She watched the screen settle, then keyed in the simulated sea state parameters: wind force 6, visibility moderate, humidity at 72%. The radar sweep pinged twice. She turned a dial half a degree, waited, then triggered the sweep again. This time, 2 soft returns blinked onto the screen. The target pips held steady for just under 3 seconds before fading. It was enough. Reese noted the bearing and fade time in the margin of her logbook. Her pencil made a soft drag across the paper, then stopped. She didn't press harder. She never needed to. Behind her, the simbay stayed still. The only sound was the ventilation fan cycling once every 30 seconds. Far down the corridor, the occasional clang of bootsteps echoed from an unseen night watch. No one else came through here at this hour. The deck above belonged to the loud ones, the shining ones, the pilots who walked like the sky owed them visibility. Down here, it was about precision. She ran the scenario again. This time, she introduced signal interference, what Command called a saturation fog layer. Most operators relied on automated filters to parse that noise. Reese didn't. She cut the filters and read the curve manually. Her hand traced the echo bounce pattern across the screen, watching as the two signals fluttered, merged, then split. She tapped the lock key just once. The radar caught them both. Clean. She entered the timestamp in her log. Page 36. Left column. Margin note. Manual bounce tracking. Unfilt. Sat fog on. Confirmed return at 100.0 nm. The graphite gleamed faintly under the console light. She flipped the page and drew the next arc freehand. Reese didn't smile. She didn't need to. The numbers spoke for themselves. On the wall behind her, a taped-over access port displayed a name written in faded marker. Carter. R. Initials from someone who had worked this station years before she was ever assigned here. She'd never met them, but she kept the tape in place. Names meant someone had used this station for something real. Her own name didn't exist on the assignment logs anymore. But her work did. She pulled a training video from the archive, one of the old declassified recordings her father used to show her when she was young. The footage was grainy. It showed a coastal approach from a carrier. The horizon split between steel-gray sky and darker ocean. The aircraft in the video was a Legacy Hornet, not a Super Hornet. Its nose dipped. The radar screen fuzzed, and then the lock came in barely visible. But there, her father had paused the tape at that moment every time. See what no one else logs, he used to say. If you can't track it on paper, it doesn't matter what the screen says. She had copied the waveform from that video into her first logbook when she was 15. Now, years later, she was replicating it with better gear and better timing, but the same principles. The sim console blinked twice. A thermal overlay map glitched, then reloaded. She reset the settings by hand. No macros, no shortcuts. Reese leaned back for a moment. Her shoulders ached from stillness, not strain. Her eyes felt dry, but she didn't rub them. She checked the radar spacing once more, ran a final sweep, then powered the system down cleanly. The echo traces disappeared, but she knew where they had been. She closed the logbook, smoothed the cover, and slid it back into the storage pocket on her gear bag. She unplugged the headset, tilted the jack just enough to keep it from catching, and wound the cord exactly 3 loops before placing it in the side tray. When she left the simbay, she turned the light off behind her. The hallway lights buzzed faintly. The corridor was empty. The night smelled faintly of oil and warm metal. Above her, the carrier drifted forward on a calm sea. No one would know she had been here. No one had seen what she built. But the signal had bounced, the data was logged, and that was enough. The sim room carried a filtered hush, the kind built not from silence, but from too many low sounds stacked on top of each other. Air vents hissed gently. A fan ticked in the corner. Every few seconds, a voice crackled in over the comms with call-outs from the flight deck. Clipped and routine. The primary monitor glowed pale green, its grid lines vibrating softly with the movement of live intercept vectors above the carrier. Reese sat at her station, headset on, listening to what no one else heard. She had been tracking the sweep returns since launch. Most of the activity followed the exercise plan. Blue Force fighters broke left in staged intercept arcs. Red Force aircraft, flown today by the French team in Rafales, flew at standard speeds through pre-designated vector bands. Every angle had been agreed to. Every maneuver was listed in the scenario documents. Until now. At first, it was subtle. Two of the Red Force aircraft shifted low, then lower. Their signal return dipped in frequency. Transponders blinked off, not all at once, just enough to trigger a soft fault flag in the SIM overlay. The automation tagged it as intermittent contact. Nothing urgent. Reese leaned in and adjusted the sweep delay on her console. The radar pass caught both aircraft again, but only for a moment. Their paths curved hard to the west, not east, not toward the intercept zone, toward the fleet. She tapped a note into the sidebar log: track decay on Red Force Units 3 and 5, altitude shift and comms silence, off plan. She didn't send it? Not yet? The headset crackled again. A voice from deck control came through, light and confident. All units maintain vector spacing. Red elements breaking script for mock stealth insert. Tracking active. Reese frowned. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She glanced at the flight plan matrix. The red insert vector was scheduled for 15 minutes later, and from the opposite approach corridor. These two aircraft were out of sync, out of position, and still descending. Her radar screen blinked. The signal from Unit 5 dropped again, then reappeared, farther west. That wasn't drift, that was real movement. "Are we logging this?" she asked, her voice calm over the channel. "Unit 5 and Unit 3 aren't following the listed route. No ID returns and angle drift is increasing." There was a pause. Then a voice answered, "Looks like low-C spoofing. Probably just their way of stress testing the cap net." It was Stitch. He wasn't in the sim room, but his voice carried over the command channel with the same tone he always used: easy, dismissive, confident. She could picture him leaning against the rail upstairs, helmet cradled under one arm, grinning slightly at the ceiling. "Chill, glint," he added. "It's part of the drill. We saw this last rotation." Reese didn't reply. Instead, she shifted the radar frequency one band lower, bypassing the default filters. The screen reloaded, slower this time. A faint arc traced across the outer ring, then another. Both signals now pointed toward the carrier's outer range, running below 1,000 feet. She looked over at the secondary monitor. The official tracking system showed nothing out of bounds. The automation hadn't flagged them. She tried again. "Track paths are mirroring real approach, not sim angle. They're within 40 miles. No signal rebound." Someone else replied this time, not unkindly. "It's scripted low vis glint. The cap has them covered. If anything was off, flight would flag it." Reese looked at the validation panel. The kill log had no entries, no confirmed intercepts. The cap jets were flying their loops, but no one had moved to engage. The Rafales were still coming. She picked up her pen and hovered it over the logbook. Her hand was steady. The timestamp was already printed on the screen. All she had to do was write it down. Confirm that this was part of the scenario. Follow the process. But it wasn't. The curves didn't match. The approach timing was too early. And the signal return from Unit 3 was now gone. This wasn't misdirection. It was action. Still, no one moved. She reached to the comms toggle, then stopped. Her headset pulsed again. Another voice confirming the blue units were staying in formation. Another report that the sky was clear. The system was doing its job. But the system wasn't seeing what she saw. The two arcs on her screen slipped closer to the edge of the grid. They were now less than 20 miles out, too low for standard radar, too fast for casual correction. She opened the diagnostics tab and reran the last 3 sweeps. The system called them noise. She knew better. On the wall beside her, the old paper map from the intercept brief still hung where she'd pinned it earlier that week. A faint pencil mark showed a potential blind spot in the radar net. She'd drawn it in after studying wind conditions and sea state data. No one had asked her to. So, no one had looked. It lined up with the path now blinking on her screen. She pressed her lips together and looked at the validation log one more time. Then she set the pen down. She stood slowly, headset cord tugging slightly at her collar as she turned toward the door. Outside the sim room, the deck would still be busy, jets climbing, technicians shouting, pilots prepping the next sortie with jokes and sharp words. Inside, her screen blinked twice. The red arcs merged. The final sweep caught nothing. They were past the net. She didn't file the entry. She didn't ask again. Reese pulled the headset off with one hand, smoothed the cord back into its tray, and walked out without a sound. Behind her, the screen refreshed. No new markers, no new entries. Nothing to report. But she knew. She had seen the curve. And they were coming. Reese stepped into the light of the upper deck without pausing. She moved with the kind of deliberate calm that registered in peripheral vision, but didn't draw comment. The sky above the carrier was open and clear, its blue broken only by the white curve of high-altitude flight trails far overhead. The deck roared with preparation refueling teams, guidance hands, the distant blast of a catapult launch in motion. No one noticed her crossing behind the lines. To her right, a Super Hornet sat cold on the tail end of the forward ramp. It had been staged for a camera drone pass later in the day, fully fueled. Optics mounted under the wing. No munitions loaded. It wasn't scheduled to fly until sunset. Its pilot hadn't even been assigned. The ladder was still down. Reese walked to the access panel and placed her hand on the frame. The metal was warm from hours of sunlight. No one stood nearby. The deck crew had shifted their focus to active launches. She climbed in. Inside the cockpit, everything was where it should be. She moved with muscle memory, pulling straps across her chest, settling into the seat without hesitation. Her gloves, taken from her belt, slid into place like they had been waiting for her. She ran the startup sequence by hand. No checklists. No backseat prompts. Avionics blinked to life. The engine started with a low growl, rising fast into a full, clean spin. Still no one noticed. She toggled the flight system into independent mode. That silenced the external alert. She didn't broadcast. She didn't need to. The tower had its attention locked on a different launch queue. Her name wasn't in it. Her radar panel came online, sweeping left in a smooth arc. The first pass was clean. No targets. She keyed in the last heading she had logged downstairs. Manual sweep angle, low C pass, 45 degrees surface slope, bounce pattern set to delay by 3 seconds. Then she moved the throttle. The Super Hornet lifted from its position like it had been waiting for her all along. She turned gently into the wind, swung around the aft corridor of the ship, and gave the tower 1 second to see her. A voice cracked across the comms, uncertain. Unscheduled takeoff identify. She did not reply. By the time they tried to raise her again, she was airborne. The jet climbed only long enough to gain clearance from the tower platform. Then she dropped. Nose angled cleanly toward sea level. Her HUD blinked. Altitude 900 feet. 700. She leveled off just above the surface, the chop of the water flickering against her lower canopy. She flew quiet. At this altitude, the carrier disappeared behind her in minutes. The air thinned of human presence. It was just her, the sea, and the sweep. The radar clicked twice, first sweep clean, no returns. She adjusted the trim manually, dialed the gain down, and tilted the emitter 1/2 degree. She knew the angle. It wasn't luck. It was repetition. Years of it. Second sweep faint bounce. She let it run again. The screen bloomed. 2 arcs appeared across the lower right quadrant. They were low, fast, and silent. The software tagged them as debris at first, but she filtered it herself, removed the automation, and let the echo cycle play again. Solid shapes, matched velocity, no transponder, flight angle aligned with the blind spot corridor she'd mapped by hand. The Rafales? She adjusted the display contrast and captured the frame. The jet shook slightly with altitude drift. She eased it back with fingertip pressure. One hand stayed on the throttle. The other traced the target markers with a slow drag across the display. The system didn't know what it was seeing, but she did. They were past the line. They had crossed under the net. She rolled left, then right, mimicking a tracking check. The system synced perfectly. Both aircraft were now within intercept range. She did not fire. There was nothing to fire. But she had them. The radar feed recorded the track. Her HUD locked the angle. The camera pod under the fuselage rotated just enough to catch a gray shadow against the deep blue below. It was enough. She logged the frame manually. 86 miles from the carrier. Both tracks confirmed. No chatter, no IFF, no protocol clearance, just raw contact. Behind her, the carrier scrambled. Voices on the comms snapped back and forth, too fast to process. Another jet launched late, confused, too high. Reese stayed silent. She swung the Super Hornet wide in a shallow arc and let the jet coast back into open airspace. The chase wasn't hers. The hit wasn't hers. The act was... all she had needed was to see. And now, everyone would. She lifted out of low altitude gradually, adjusting her trim and throttle to bring the aircraft back toward the carrier at a steady pace. No angle brakes. No rolls. Nothing flashy. The horizon opened as she rose. The deck was just visible again. A few shadows gathered along the landing strip. Someone would be waiting. She didn't reach for the comms. She didn't explain. She just flew. Straight. Level. Proven. Her gloves gripped the stick with the quiet authority of someone who had never once doubted what the radar would show. The rest was already on the record. The command center had been loud moments earlier. Status calls. Scheduling chatter. Clipped confirmations from the tower, everything flowing at operational speed. But when Reese's feed came online, the sound tapered off. Not all at once. Not with fanfare, but with that distinct shift that happens when people stop talking mid-sentence and forget to finish. It was the AWACS crew who noticed first. One of the watchstanders leaned in and pointed at the screen, his finger hovering just above the playback track as it scrolled forward frame by frame. The radar returns didn't blink or stutter like a simulation. They pulsed slow and clean. Too clean. That's not a sim. Someone said. The room didn't answer. On the upper deck, flight coordination watched the feed roll across the main display. 2 arcs moved low across the surface grid, visible only through Reese's angle. The labels were blank. No IFF tags. No signal pings. Just solid returns. Raw and unmistakable. Inside the mission bay, Stitch stood in front of the monitor wall with a squad leader and one of the French officers. The live feed from Reese's HUD displayed both intercepts with full telemetry altitude, bearing, closure speed. There was no noise in the video. No warning tones. Just the hum of the radar sweep and her own breathing steady, slow, deliberate. "Wait," said Stitch, frowning. "That's her camera rig. That was a drone pod jet." The French officer tilted his head slightly. "That is not drone footage. She wasn't cleared to fly." Stitch said, voice thinner now. She wasn't even on the manifest. But the data kept coming. The system logged the lock at 86 miles. The trajectory matched the intercept path. A secondary display compared it against the drill simulation files. The times didn't match. The vectors didn't match. This wasn't a scenario. The room was now silent. A technician muted the background channels. The feed ran uninterrupted. On screen, Reese's Super Hornet coasted back into range. No evasive maneuvers. No aggression. The aircraft moved with practiced precision, every course adjustment deliberate. A moment later, the voice from the French Rafale team crackled through the log channel. The pilot confirmed he had received radar lock while under the net. "We did not expect contact," he said, flat and professional. "But we were seen." No one answered him. At the landing strip, the deck crew stood by with clearance vectors, unsure if the returning jet was scheduled, but the Super Hornet matched the profile. It banked once, lined up with the glide slope, and touched down without delay. The arresting gear caught smoothly. The jet rolled back along the deck until the cable released. The entire motion was precise, controlled, uneventful. Until Reese stepped out. She moved without drama, helmet tucked under one arm, gloves still on. Her face was unreadable beneath the canopy glare. The nearest ground crew gave her space. No one clapped. No one called out. At the edge of the landing zone, her helmet bag waited where she had left it. The sticky note was gone. In its place, the fabric was smooth, no marks. She walked past Stitch without looking at him. He didn't speak. Behind him, the feed replayed again on a loop. Zoomed in now. The moment of lock was frozen on the screen, two arcs held steady in a shallow pitch curve. The radar return blooming with clarity that no other system had caught. The squad captain watched the footage twice, hands folded. Then, without comment, he stepped forward and tapped the pause key. The screen froze. That was textbook, he said, almost to himself. Except no one taught that. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't point. He just stared at the feed, then turned and walked away. Reese reached the edge of the carrier's hangar deck and stopped. She removed her gloves one finger at a time and set them into her flight bag. Her movements were slow and exact, not for show, but for habit. Around her, the usual post-sortie shuffle began again. Crews moved. Orders resumed. Someone started a checklist readback. But the conversation had changed. It no longer centered on the scheduled intercepts or the missed cap calls. It centered on her. Quietly, the radar team filed a revised report. Her footage became the only confirmed intercept log of the exercise. The AWACS review team submitted her name as the identifying pilot on both returns. The French crew made no objection. No one protested. No one tried to explain it away. The data had spoken. As the carrier moved slowly forward across calm water, the horizon lit by the last trace of afternoon sun, the only thing left was the record, the HUD feed, the clean telemetry, the radar lock, no interviews, no questions. It had happened, and everyone had seen it. The hangar bay had emptied by the time the lights dimmed for night ops. Only the exhaust fans kept moving, their hum steady against the rustle of wind from the open carrier edge. A few spotlights remained on over the staging platforms, casting long shadows across the floor. The salt air drifted in through the wide hangar doors, mixing with the faint smell of fuel and warmed metal. Reese sat near the edge of the stacked gear lockers, her back to the bulkhead, knees slightly drawn, elbows resting on them with the quiet stillness of someone who wasn't waiting for anything. Her helmet bag was beside her. The sticky note from earlier, the one that had clung to the fabric like a joke no one was brave enough to say aloud, was gone. In its place, folded cleanly into the webbing strap, was a slip of paper half the size of a checklist card. It read 2 words, only track. She didn't smile. She didn't touch it. She just sat there a little longer, letting the sound of the sea and steel settle together into something familiar. The roster had been updated an hour earlier. Printed sheets went up on the mission board by the command annex, exactly where they always did. Most people passed it without reading too closely. Pilots scanned for their names, then moved on. No announcements, no explanations. But someone had added her name. She was listed as Lead 2 for the next day's intercept rotation. No commentary, no change in title, just her name in the same red ink everyone else had received. The air shifted near the far end of the bay. A younger pilot, flight vest half-zipped, walked up with a slower pace than usual. He didn't hold his shoulders the way the others did. There was no tilt of superiority, no bounce of nerves, just curiosity. He stopped in front of the pinned sheet on the wall. Her logbook pages had been taped there earlier, likely by someone who didn't think twice about it. The pencil sketches, radar arcs, angle notations, waveform traces were visible under the yellow-tinted light, looking more like a weather map than anything official. The young pilot leaned in, eyes scanning the page. "You drew these by hand?" he asked without turning. Reese didn't answer right away. She reached into the side pocket of her gear bag, pulled out the actual logbook, and flipped to the same page. The one he was staring at was just a copy. She stood, crossed to him, and held it open so he could see the graphite lines in their original form. No highlight colors, no computer overlay, just pressure and repetition and calibration notes drawn between finger-width grid margins. He nodded once. "That's from today?" he asked. She nodded back. His next question came slower. "Can you show me?" She didn't answer with anything big. No story, no shift in stance. She didn't make a speech about how long it had taken her to learn or how often she had been ignored. She just looked at the page again, then back at him. "Yes," she said. He didn't ask when. He didn't try to follow her. He just looked again, studying the shape of the return paths, the way she'd marked the spacing between sweeps. Behind them, the hangar echoed with the sound of someone closing a panel. A faint clang carried across the space and faded. The logbook pages fluttered once under a gust from the fans, then settled. Reese closed the book with one hand, not snapping it shut, but pressing the cover gently until the binding held. She returned to her helmet bag and slid the logbook into the inner pocket. She adjusted the strap once, checked the alignment, then pulled her gloves free and laid them across the top. When she stood again, the wind coming in through the side opening had shifted direction. The sea breeze cut across the deck at a sharper angle, bringing a cooler edge to the night. She walked past the younger pilot without waiting for him to say anything else. He didn't stop her. She didn't glance back. As she moved out onto the side ramp, the lights of the carrier cast a pale arc against the floor, outlining her figure in soft contrast. The water beyond stretched out dark and still, broken only by the rhythmic churn of the ship's steady progress forward. No one followed. No voice called out. There was no recognition ceremony, no formal words, no public reversal. Just motion, just momentum. The truth of what she had done no longer needed to be explained. It had been seen. It had been logged. It had become part of the record. And now it lived there understood, intact and unshaken. She was called a sim-only pilot, told she didn't count, dismissed without argument, but she didn't push back. She trained. She listened. She built what no one else could see. And when it mattered, she flew alone and proved it, not with noise or defiance, but with quiet mastery. Reese's journey reminds us that strength doesn't always arrive in a spotlight. Sometimes it waits in the dark, patient and exact, until the moment comes to act without permission. If you've ever been overlooked or underestimated, let this story be a reminder. You don't have to shout to be right. You just have to keep your skill ready. If this spoke to something in you, share your thoughts below and follow for more quiet, powerful stories like this about dignity held, purpose reclaimed, and the silent kind of strength that never asks to be seen. It just is.